name is Michelle, and today I'll be talking to you about gender roles. So, what are gender roles? So, gender roles are a set of social norms which dictate what is acceptable socially and in our society based on our sexuality. So, please keep in mind the difference between sex and gender. Sex has to do more with biological traits, while gender has more of a cultural meaning, thus gives more room for personal identities because it has to do more with masculinity and femininity. So the ways of knowing that I will be focusing on in my presentation is religion, perception, reason, and ethics. So my knowledge question is, to what extent do gender roles define who we are and how does this impact our lives? So the real life situation that got me thinking about how gender roles define us and impact our lives is the story of my grandmother. So my grandmother is an immigrant from Mexico where she lived in a small town in Michoacan. So this town was very traditional and they believed that the man was above a woman. So in the case of marriage, my grandmother had to fulfill the role of the typical housewife. So my grandmother cleaned, cooked not only her house, but the house of her in-laws and took care of them while my grandfather was out doing whatever he wanted, with no consequence. So my grandmother was forced to submit into this life of just bearing children whenever my grandfather demanded it, and just doing whatever he said, basically. And she was deprived of the right to work since in her village they had that belief that women weren't supposed to be working. They were supposed to be at home caring for the children and keeping up with the housekeeping. And she wanted to work, but she said, and I quote, "There's no place for a woman in the fields," is what she would get as a response every single time. This opened up my curiosity of how gender roles define who we are and how it impacts us. So this shows the limitations that my grandmother had to go through as she faced these unfair gender roles. I see the connection between how gender roles define us and impact our lives with the example because my grandmother, she had to change her whole being to conform into this set role of what the perfect wife would be. So my first claim, I am going to be talking about how religion works into this. So the story that I'm using is the one of Adam and Eve. As you all know, Adam and Eve were the first two created by God, and God had made Eve with the intention of her being a helpmate to Adam. So basically, she was going to be his female counterpart that would meet his needs while she met his. So this complementarian view makes the claim that gender roles basically don't exist because they're not above each other. They're equal. They're counterparts that are that have more of a equal partnership rather than some kind of ranking system. But a counterclaim to this could be that the story of Adam and Eve is sexist because when they bit into the apple, it was committed by the both of them, but for some reason, Eve is the only one that's deciphered as this temptress, and that she was the one to blame for the sins of all mankind. However, Adam, he did the same action, but the church did not see the blame as his, and so he didn't receive equal responsibility for his actions. So this claim is supported by what we learned in the TOK textbook in our religion chapter, and the notion of how can God be this all-loving, amazing creator, but there's still so much harm in the world. Like, gender roles should not exist if we're all created equal. Well, the paradox of change contradicts this because the fact that Adam and Eve still have those gender roles is because God tried to change Eve, but it was already too late. And what was done was already done. So now women have to live with that, have to live with knowing that they're going to be blamed for something that happened a really long time ago and that they had no connection to, whether or not they be religious. And learning about this claim had me understand from a religious perspective how gender roles impact different people. and depending on the religion it is. For example, a Christian could say that there's no such thing as gender roles because God created us all equal. So the second claim, I'm going to be focusing on ethics. And the claim is gender roles define and impact lives differently in different societies and cultures. So how is this important in our textbook? Well, in our textbook, it mentions something called moral relativism. And this basically states that our values are not universal. So our values here in America could be seen as something totally disrespectful and immoral in a different country. And this supports the claim because the different societies, they hold women and men at different standards depending on, again, their religion or their just simple belief systems. An example is in the US, there hasn't been a single female president. And in last year's election in 2016, Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, many people made sexist remarks towards Hillary Clinton, saying that just because she was a woman, she wasn't capable to be at such a high position and that she wouldn't be able to handle it. This illustrates the claim because they saw Clinton not as someone who used to be Secretary of the State or someone that has this power and this determination, but as someone who, as Trump tweeted, if Clinton can't satisfy her husband, how can she satisfy America? Going back to how Clinton is supposed to fulfill this stereotype and this gender role that she's supposed to be her husband's playmate. And then the fact that America hasn't had a woman in charge says a lot about us, because in Germany there is a chancellor named Angela Merkel who has been in office since 2005, proving that moral relativism defines how we treat people differently. Because how is it that a woman can't handle this task, but there's a woman who has been in charge since 2005 in Germany? So my third claim has to do with perception. So the claim is gender roles are a necessary form of establishing our identity. Each gender is important because it has a responsibility of its own. Hence, there's only things that men can do and there are only things that women can do. So basically they're saying that without gender roles, then we would have a loss of identity and we wouldn't know what to do with ourselves. So there'd be some form of chaos. So this is supported in our TOK textbook in the perception section where it talks about expectations. In most societies, there's predisposed expectations of what a woman and a man should be like. For example, in America, a man, if he cries, it is shown as weakness, and he would be not considered a man anymore, but a wimp. But if a woman was to do that, then it's socially acceptable. It's fine for her to show that kind of vulnerability and that kind of emotion. And so an example of expectations is when you go into, say, Toys R Us, and you look at the boys section and the girls section, there's a big difference in the types of toys that is available for them. So they already have this expectations that the girls are going to want toys with makeup in them and dolls. They even have toys that are small versions of cleaning materials. Well, you go to the boys section and they have things like dinosaurs and Legos and cars because men are expected to do something in construction or something that's appeared more as tough. So here's how we see this expectation, how even at young ages, we're still imposing these beliefs onto young children. So learning about expectations helped me understand how gender roles form even at a young age, because we are so brainwashed that I feel we do things without even realizing what we're doing. So we're passing it on to these young children without even realizing that we're imposing these gender roles upon them. So this connects to my real life situation because once my grandmother was married, she was expected to change all of her ways to conform and be the perfect wife that she was supposed to be, that would cook and clean for my grandfather without any questions, without hesitation. She was expected to just change. So my fourth claim has to do with reason. So reason affects how some people think because they look at things from a more realistic perspective. So it's not as much as they're trying to be sexist, but they want to be more realistic and beneficial for both parties. So this claim is supported in the TOK textbook under the reason chapter. So a lot of people that follow this belief in belief bias. So meaning that they think that gender roles should exist because it's just a simpler answer to live their life, and it's easier than to just challenge everything every single day. So it's easier for them to just conform and be what society wants them to be because they believe that that's going to be easier for them. For example, in a lot of heterosexual marriages, they get married not because of love, but because they've been with their partner for so long that they see it as beneficial to just get married and be able to share benefits. And by learning about this claim, I see why people think that gender roles are necessary, because it's simpler for them to just conform to this ideal instead of always having to challenge them and be living in fear of being casted out or being shunned for not conforming into society's beliefs. So this connects to my real life situation because for my grandmother, it was easier for her to just conform into being the wife that they wanted her to be instead of always getting into problems with my grandfather and potentially being in an abusive relationship, because my grandfather, he was very traditional and he didn't believe that my grandmother was equal to him. So it was just easier for her to avoid problems and live this lifestyle with him. So in conclusion, how would I answer my knowledge question? Well, I do believe that gender roles define us a lot, sadly, whether or not we like it, because I myself always find myself trying to do things that they say that as a woman I cannot do, or that I see that girls aren't doing as much, because I feel that we should be equal even if we're not. And this impacts our daily lives because I feel that in society we're always trying to be careful about what we do or what we say so it doesn't come off as us being, for example, the example I gave of a man crying in public, him being shown as weak, that the idea that we have to hold back our feelings and bottle them up just so we're not casted as someone that's weak or lesser of, to me is ridiculous. And the implication that it has on my real life situation and other real life situations, that gender roles do exist. Whether or not people like to talk about it or like to acknowledge it, the fact is that it affects us in every way because as a woman and as a man, they're always going to tell us what we can and can't do, and it's only going to be up to us to make that change. And that concludes.